David Hale, ESPN, hanging out with us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline. Get off your keister, get to Heister. So, speaking of Mystery Science Theater 3000, I kind of wanted you and Andrea Adelson to do that while these AD meetings were taking place. You know, like they don't need to know that you're there. We just get a camera fixated on. So, who told Brett McMurphy to call it the Magnificent Seven? And then you and Andrea can just make, some commentary while all these things are going on. That had to be a surreal experience. Before we get into the news of the ACC, I wanted to go back to last week because there's all this dumpster fire on social media. And Amelia Island, they had to be consuming this in a completely different way, right?
It was such a surreal thing to sort of watch play out in real time. Like, I had lunch with Andrea on Monday when we got there, and Michael Alford sitting at the table, like 2 tables away, and I see Brett McMurphy come and sit down with Michael Alford. I'm like, oh, I wonder what's going to come from this. And then you just see it come out on Twitter, and then you see like the ADs walking around with their phones. Then you kind of hear some yelling going on in the rooms, and it's just like, it was like one of those like mousetrap games where it's just like you see like one thing set off the next thing that set off the next thing in real time. It was ridiculous. Look, I'm not critiquing McMurphy's journalistic standards or whatever. He made up the Magnificent Seven name, pulled it out of his ass, and puts it out there, and suddenly people are acting as if, Dan Radakovich was like sending out a text invite like Magnificent Seven, welcome to you get a member, here's your membership card and smoking jacket. It was a thing. None of this, it's funny because every single person that I talked to there was essentially like, this isn't news. We all knew this was going on. Like,
thank you. It's not news.
And yet, they're all furious at each other about this non-news. And it was so like how you can't be both utterly unsurprised and also outraged at the same time. I don't understand how that was happening. But no, it was not news. Have schools looked at the grant of rights? Hell yes, they have. They'd be stupid not to. Are multiple schools getting together and talking about what the future might look like? Hell yes. And I got news for you. It ain't really 7. They probably had a conversation with 7. There's 4 schools, as we all know, who actually are in a position to have a landing spot if they find a way out, and that would really financially benefit from getting out. But at this point, if they ain't leaving, nobody else is leaving yet. And I think it's just it's infuriating to keep having these conversations about schools bailing. And it's all starts from like this idea that like nobody freaking understands how a contract works or something. It's mind boggling.
David Hale, ESPN, joining us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline. Now, I just want to explore this concept a little bit that it's not news because you've talked to a lot of the same people that I've talked to. And at the AD level, and they all say the same thing about there's been real discontent and a disconnect between the schools in terms of, hey, what are you doing to kind of carry your own weight? Like, because the old ACC, quite frankly, was, it was the 3 Musketeers, all for one, one for all. That was the hallmark of the 8-team league, was everybody got an equal share. And I think so much of the leadership of the league has changed. It's interesting that off the top of your head, you mentioned Radakovich, because to me, he feels like the one who's really in a position to kind of be the next leader, even if Phillips is the commissioner. It feels like to me, Radakovich, from all of his different stops, might have the true sway to kind of galvanize a little bit, because that's what I feel like. There's a power vacuum, David, don't you?
I don't think that's wrong. And in fact, the way that last week played out really, I think, underscores that, because what Michael Alford did, whether you approve of it or not, was lob a bomb into a room that lacked a cohesive narrative and created the narrative around the disruption. And I think you have, we talk about the 4 schools, which if you are not wise enough to have figured this out on your own, which anyone could, it's Miami, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina. And you look at those 4 ADs. Well, Michael Alford is the bomb thrower. I mean, that's the guy who is front and center on the front lines, saying all the things that no one else wants to say publicly.
Yeah.
And I think everybody else is thrilled to have him take that heat, and he's thrilled to do it. Then you have Bubba, who is sort of I don't think any of this makes Bubba happy. I don't think he wants to be doing any of this. I think he is reluctantly aware of reality. But I don't think this is not the rabbit hole he wants to climb down. So there's this sort of reluctant acceptance there. And then you have Dan and Graham. And Graham, of course, came up under Dan at Clemson. And so I think there's a natural flow of okay, let's see what Dan has to say about this. And you're exactly right. I mean, I think he is the one who he worked at Georgia Tech, so he understands sort of the real budget constraints of some of the smaller schools. He worked at Clemson, and he understands what it takes to win at the highest level. He's been in the league for forever. I think he has the respect of the people there. And frankly, I think he knows he's not going to be around 10 years from now still doing this. And so he sort of has the freedom to say, I don't give a goddamn about what you think. I'm going to do what we need to do here, say what needs to be said. So, I think you're right. And look, I've not talked to anybody who wants to explicitly frame this as a Jim Phillips failure by any stretch of the imagination. Most people seem to be Jim Phillips fans, but the criticism is it's a little, at least publicly, to tell you what you want to hear, but be kind of Pollyanna-ish about the whole thing and not accepting or embracing what the reality of the situation is. It's sort of trying to put a lot of lipstick on pigs. And I think that
he's also new to the room, David. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in the room. He's new to not only is he new to the room, but it's kind of like when we get on Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, and people are like, he works for the owners. That's why he gets paid the money he gets paid. He's kind of a meat shield for the owners. And in a way, Jim Phillips, and to a certain extent before that, John Swofford, ultimately was the behest of what the presidents want at the presidential level. And all Jim Phillips is working with, may I remind everybody, Jim Phillips is working with a grant of rights deal that everybody showed up in Chapel Hill and celebrated when it finally got knocked out,
including Dan Radakovich and Bob Cunningham.
That grant of rights was keeping the league strong for a very long time with a wonderful partner, your employer, David, ESPN. It's a 50-50 proposition. The network is coming. We are good to go. And then all of a sudden, it's no longer good enough because we're getting caught up in what these other conferences are doing, which gets us to the real heart of the issue. And I guess as you put it on a Twitter thread the other day, you're putting Band-Aids on bullet holes here, bullet wounds that, okay, you're going to change the revenue structure for a more of a eat what you kill model. So if you're successful, it's not lost on me that this model goes into effect when the college football playoff expands, that, all right, you make it to the college football playoff, you go further in the NCAA tournament, you get more of the money. And that's going to be, you get more of the money. That's kind of a nice bump, but it does cut to the heart of the real issue here for the ACC. All these things were occurring when your tentpole teams were not holding up their end of the bargain. Michael Alford can bang the table all day about how we're XYZ and we get television ratings and yada, 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 but it doesn't mean squat if you're not competing, and they hadn't competed for 10 freaking years. So some of this, the onus is on the schools. They're the ones who are culpable in this because they haven't been holding up their end of the bargain. What's Jim Phillips supposed to do? Score touchdowns for you? Because that's ultimately what's needed.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on with this. I don't know how much worse off or better off the ACC would be if the success on the field by Florida State or Miami or Virginia Tech had been different over the last decade. Some of this stuff was sort of etched in stone before that. But I mean, you look at sort of the run up to the early 2010s expansions and realignments, and the ACC was at an absolute nadir at that point of just terrible football, the end of the Bowden era, pre-Dabo era.
Yeah.
Paul Johnson was the one leading the charge for the ACC, and that's, much as I love Paul, not a ratings winner. And then, you get to this point where you come off of the Clemson championship in 2018. Florida State there's still this idea like maybe they'll get that. I don't think anybody quite at that point realized how bad things were. And there was some enthusiasm. Then you go into COVID You get the realignment happening with Texas and Oklahoma. You get the realignment happening with the Big Ten. You get the new TV deals. All this is happening at a time in which there's questions at Clemson. I'm not saying Clemson's window is closed, but there's questions there that weren't there before. Florida State is on the upswing, it seems like, but still not there.
We don't know.
It's funny. It's funny to talk about how success initiatives might help Florida State when they have not had success. And then, Carolina has been this quote unquote sleeping giant for all of our lifetimes, basically. And Miami, there's the kids being recruited today were not alive the last time Miami was a truly relevant football program.
You bring up Florida State. You bring up Florida State. You bring up Florida State and how they can go forward. I mean, I'm thinking 2017 Miami. Where Miami's back, they're going to keep this thing rolling. How'd that work out for the Hurricanes after they got smoked by Clemson in the ACC championship game? Florida State might find themselves in the same situation where we're bumping up, and then wheels fall off.
I like Mike Norvell. I like what they're building there.
Sure.
I do think they're trying to do things the right way. I tend to, if you ask me which direction do I think Florida State's going, I think they're going to be in a better place moving forward. This is again a conversation that I've had with at least one AD from the quote unquote non-magnificent seven or the insignificant seven is like, look at Florida State, not just from a wins and losses perspective, but financially. I mean, they were in an enormous hole, maybe as big a hole as anyone in the ACC coming into all of this. Mm-hmm. So the revenue disparity is not just like, look what Florida is going to make compared to us. It's that we were already trying to, dig ourselves out of a tremendous hole before all of this. And again, to Michael Alford's credit, he's done a very good job of trying to address the obvious problems there. But, there's a lot of ACC schools playing catch up already. And as they're trying to catch up, the other leagues are pulling away.
Does Nora need something, Joe? You muted your mic, by the way. You muted your mic. Tell your mom I said hi. This is the beauty of doing these podcasts from home.
I love it.
Well, I don't have any dogs.
I gotta see. I saw Lou.
This is the alternative. They're both here.
Okay. All right.
But I actually had a question for David Hale here before all of the action here. You said those four schools have an alternative. Do you realistically think the SEC is an alternative for Florida State? Because I do not.
Yeah, I don't. And I frankly, I'm not sure Florida State wants that alternative. Okay. Even
so we're talking about the Big Ten, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I talked to ADs and I'm like, if you had to choose SEC or Big Ten, what would you want? And almost to a man, the ADs that I've talked to will say, well, I think our fans want the SEC and I want the Big Ten. And I think you can read between the lines on exactly why that is. For all the money that the Big Ten gets, that ain't the same level of football as what's being played in the SEC. And to tag on to that, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but whatever. Yeah. We already have moms walking in the background. There's no rules.
I mean, Sarah Sivian had her cat Rangoon walk across the camera yesterday, so it's all good.
But I think that one of the things I'll be very interested in is, let's say the ACC doesn't blow up for 3 more years or so. How are these conversations any different if USC goes to the Big Ten and starts getting smoked on a regular basis, and Texas and Oklahoma go to the SEC and they're finishing 6-6 every year? Is the desire to leave a league where you can go 10-2 or 11-1, does it change at all? I don't know. I think at the end of the day, money always drives everything. But I do think there's going to have to be a serious perspective adjustment on what it means to go 7-5 in the SEC.
Isn't that the ACC's biggest ace right now? I know Joe is disagreeing because of money, but that feels like the ACC's only ace in the hole right now.
Was it not the Big 12's ace in the hole?
Well, that wasn't helping Texas at all anyway. But still.
And that's the other thing too. That's the thing.
But this is important, Joe.
Okay.
Because Texas and Oklahoma are already 2 of the 5 richest programs in football. So they weren't necessarily motivated by money. They are motivated. They are currently motivated by prestige. I think David's right, though. if Oklahoma in particular, remember, has been a regular participant in the playoff. If they get to the SEC, even in an expanded 12-team field, now chances are they probably are going to be there if they have the right coach. I'm not convinced they have the right coach, but we'll see what happens with Oklahoma. But to me, that's the ACC's biggest pull and their only ace right now with Clemson, Florida State, and maybe even Miami to say, oh, cool, you want to go get your brains beat in another conference? That's awesome. But I'm going to stay here and I'm going to play in the playoff every single year.
That's an AD talking. Presidents want, schools want money. That's ultimately what universities want. They want money. And that's going to drive their decisions going forward. David, I think it was your tweet thread where it's like, even if there was let's say the Magnificent Seven was a real thing, right? Like it actually was, you had this cabal that was all trying to really get out of the grant of rights. What makes you think that one of those sevens wouldn't find a better deal for themselves and bounce, right? Like it's not, these schools act on their own. Ultimately, their interests are the things that are going to supersede it. What, if you really wanted to get interesting here, Florida State, and we'll close on this, and David Hale joining us on the Easter Automotive Group hotline from ESPN. Florida State, that's easy. They can do whatever the hell they want. Clemson can do whatever the hell they want. Miami, they can do whatever the hell they want. North Carolina can't. All right. North Carolina can't. And I know that people pointed out, well, Texas A&M was able to leave Texas behind. Of course, you saw how that worked out. But all politics is local. And I kind of get the sense that, and Joe and I have referenced this, if you're an NC State fan, you want to make sure that relationship between Bubba Cunningham and Boo Corrigan is super Loctite, like your Skull and Bones club really comes through the Notre Dame secret handshake. Because North Carolina is going to have to come through with NC State in some form or fashion, wherever it is they go. Duke ends up being the most intriguing part of this because they have a brand that I think is valuable. But that's the thing where if you're a part of this Magnificent Seven, David, and you're truly exploring things, there are some schools that cannot act on their own because they have other state issues that they have to consider. Virginia Tech is another example of this.
Yeah, no, and this is, again, everybody who is on Twitter and thinks that they have the solution to the ACC's problem are freaking crazy because there is no easy solution here.
No.
If there was, it would have happened already. The grant of rights is not like a thing you just get to say, let me hire a good lawyer, we'll get out of it. It ain't that simple. Yeah. And finding a landing spot is not just like, well, we're Clemson, of course we'll go to the SEC. Like, it ain't that simple. And again, the politics that goes into all of this. I mean, Baylor is in the Big 12 because the governor of Texas at the time that the Big 12 was formed was a Big 12 graduate. And they said, you have to take Baylor or we're not going to get behind this. Like, these things happen and they're all part of this giant web of complications that, look, again, you can criticize or praise Jim Phillips. You can criticize or praise Michael Alford and all the others. Like, I don't want to be in their shoes because there is no easy solution here.